Imagine waking up to this headline. A war was planned. Then it was canceled, not by peace, not by law, but by oil. The President of the United States says he stopped a second wave of attacks on Venezuela because prisoners were released, because pipelines were opened, because cooperation suddenly appeared. That is not negotiation. That is leverage. I'm Fareed Zakaria. And what you are watching unfold is not foreign policy as we once knew it. It is raw power, stripped of ceremony, military force on standby, energy deals on the table, diplomacy reduced to a transaction, war threatened, war paused, all ships still in place. If this feels unsettling, it should, because this moment tells us something profound about the world we now live in. If you want to understand how power really works today, don't look away. Listen closely. Share this if it makes you uncomfortable, because before we judge what happened, we must first understand what problem is truly being solved. What exactly is the problem here? On the surface, it looks simple. The United States claims Venezuela is cooperating, prisoners are released, oil infrastructure is reopened, military strikes are paused, but that is not the real story. The real question is this: who is actually in control? Because Venezuela is not being treated as a negotiating partner. It is being treated as a variable, a lever inside a much larger equation. Trump makes this clear when he speaks to oil executives. You're not dealing with Venezuela, he says. You're dealing with us. That single sentence changes everything. This is no longer about democracy versus authoritarianism. It is about access, security, and enforcement. About who guarantees stability and at what price. And once power is framed this way, traditional diplomacy begins to collapse. To understand how we arrived at this moment, we have to go back. To understand this moment, we need context. And context always lives in history. For years, Venezuela has been trapped in a cycle: economic collapse, political isolation, energy wealth without energy power. Oil is the center of that cycle. It funds the state, it shapes foreign interest, and it becomes leverage when everything else fails. When the United States cut ties in 2019, it wasn't just symbolic. Diplomats left, embassies closed, sanctions tightened. Venezuela lost legitimacy, but it did not lose oil. What followed was a stalemate: pressure from outside, control from inside, and a population caught in between. Fast forward to now. Military force suddenly reappears. Aircraft carriers, seized tankers, public threats. This is not accidental. It is escalation by design, because in moments of prolonged crisis, history shows something predictable. Power stops waiting, and systems begin to break. And when they do, the first cracks always appear suddenly. Then the first crack appears, not in Caracas, not in Washington, but at sea. An oil tanker is seized in the Caribbean, boarded by US forces, launched from an aircraft carrier sitting off Venezuela's coast. This is not symbolic pressure. This is kinetic power. Almost immediately, Trump announces something striking. A second wave of attacks was planned and then canceled. Why? Because prisoners were released, because cooperation on oil infrastructure began. This is the crisis within the crisis. Military escalation does not end in war. It ends in a deal. But notice the structure of that deal. The US Navy stays in place. The threat remains active. The pause is conditional. This is peace by suspension, stability by intimidation, and it sends a clear signal. Compliance is rewarded. Resistance is punished. If you find this logic unsettling, pause here, because this is where power stops being visible and starts becoming systemic. To see that system clearly, we need to look beneath the surface. What you're seeing is not improvisation. It is a system where military force sets the boundary, Energy controls the incentive, and diplomacy becomes a management tool. Look closely at how this works. The US does not ask Venezuela to reform. It asks it to comply, release prisoners, open access, allow infrastructure to be rebuilt under supervision. Then comes the critical shift. American companies are told they are dealing with us directly, not Caracas. Washington, this is power centralized. Security is guaranteed externally. Investment is filtered politically. Sovereignty becomes conditional. And here is the hidden mechanism. Once stability is provided by force, legitimacy becomes optional. That is why embassies can reopen without elections, why talks resume without recognition, why pressure and cooperation coexist. This is not chaos. It is controlled ambiguity. And it works until it doesn't, because systems like this always create tension below the surface. And when that tension breaks through, it never looks theoretical. It looks human. Now, let me bring this back to you, because while governments trade leverage, you live with the consequences. If you are Venezuelan, this system does not feel abstract. It feels personal, uncertain, exhausting. Prison doors open, but not all of them. Announcements are made, but families wait outside, still hoping. You hear the word peace, but you see warships that never leave. You hear cooperation, but your future is still negotiated by others. And if you are not Venezuelan, don't be too comfortable, because this model does not stay local. It travels. A world where power decides first and explanation comes later is a world where ordinary people absorb the shock. If this story makes you uneasy, that reaction matters. Share this. Talk about it. Because silence is what allows systems like this to normalize. And once they do, they don't stop at borders. Next, we need to look at how this moment reshapes the global order. What happens in Venezuela does not stay in Venezuela, because the signal travels fast across borders, across regions, across assumptions we once believed were stable. Colombia hears it. Its president speaks openly about fearing the same fate. A phone call, a warning, a suggestion that military plans can appear suddenly. This is how pressure radiates outward. Insurgent groups become cartels. Borders become operational zones. Joint strikes become normalized. And beyond Latin America, the lesson is unmistakable. Power is no longer waiting for permission. It is acting first, explaining later. Energy producers watch closely. Allies recalibrate quietly. Rivals take notes, because if legitimacy can be bypassed in one place, it can be bypassed anywhere. This is not a return to the old world of empires. It is something more modern, more transactional, more efficient, but also more fragile. And fragility always raises the same question: what happens next? So let's look ahead, not with certainty, but with scenarios. First, the optimistic path. Pressure leads to order. Cooperation deepens. Oil flows. Embassies reopen. Elections come slowly, imperfectly, but credibly. Stability is purchased. Time is gained. The system holds. Second, the middle path. The pause becomes permanent limbo. Ships stay. Deals continue. Prisoners are released in batches. Power remains external. Venezuela functions, but it does not resolve. This is managed instability. It looks calm, but it never settles. And then there is the dark path. Compliance breaks, trust collapses, force returns, this time on land, not just in Venezuela, but beyond. Escalation spreads faster than control. History tells us something uncomfortable. Systems built on leverage work until the leverage fails. And when it fails, the consequences arrive all at once. Which brings us to the final question. What are we supposed to learn from this? This story is not really about Trump or Venezuela. It is about the world you are entering. A world where power speaks plainly, where oil replaces ideology, where legitimacy is negotiated, not earned. I've covered global politics for decades, and I can tell you this with confidence. When force and economics merge this tightly, the rules change for everyone. Peace becomes conditional, sovereignty becomes flexible, and stability is rented, not owned. The question is not whether this model works. It clearly does. The question is how long we are willing to live inside it. If you felt unsettled watching this unfold, that means you're paying attention. Stay curious. Question simple explanations. And don't confuse calm with justice. If you want to understand the forces shaping the next decade, follow this conversation. Share it. And join me in the next video. Because the future is not announced in advance. It reveals itself one decision at a time.